So I do have the pleasure of speaking with you, Deputy Chief Kendale Adams of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. I did a little bit of research on you just to make sure I was up to pace with everything that you've accomplished so far in the community. I know that you've been with IMPD for over 24 years, which is impressive, definitely. From your position as sergeant, lieutenant, and then of course your new position within 2020 as the deputy chief of police. What I was really impressed with in my research of you is your focus on the oversight and the audit and performance of body cameras and improving transparency in your community. That focus was very important to me, considering what's going on in our community right now. So a lot of the questions that we have today kind of address the need for transparency within our society. So thanks once again for taking the time to speak with me, Chief Adams. So tell me, what was your reason for joining the law enforcement industry?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think, I wanted an opportunity to serve. I think some of the, important aspect of my early childhood was mentorship. And, often I was asked, what can you do? Even young men, what can you do to change our community? And often the answer or the responses I got back from elders within our community was service, right? Service to your community. There's no greater gift you can give to your community that of service. So I chose the area of law enforcement because one of my mentors at the time was an Indianapolis Police Department police officer and had a very big impact in my early childhood. And I said, that seems like a noble and professional career, or noble and honorable career. And so I say all that to say that, he was a big influence in my life. He later went on to be to the FBI, but that was a nexus for me. Those two kind of thought processes helped develop my mind around becoming a law enforcement officer.
Okay, wow. What was the name of the officer who inspired you? I don't think I got that.
Right. But Kenny Smith later went on to he's an FBI agent with Federal Bureau of Investigation. But we stay in contact. He was actually mentoring me, and kind of just providing a strong male influence in my life at the time. And I don't think he had any thought that I would be a police officer. Certainly didn't that wasn't his intent. But because of who he was, because of the impact he had, it helped direct my path very early on in my life. And I credit that as, a lot I talk to even today, they have no idea what they want to do. I mean, they're in school, they're high school, some of them even in college, and they still don't know what they want to do. I had the benefit of knowing that law enforcement was a profession that I wanted to pursue early on. And so it helped direct my path in terms of, my college pursuits and making sure that, I stayed primarily out of trouble. So, I knew that, in order to be a police officer, you had to have somewhat of a clean record. And so anyway, my point is that helped direct my path even as late as college, and graduated from college. I was able to join the police department right out of college. And so had a job. So all those things I credit to Kenny Smith and the mentors that I had in my life, but it really goes back to an act of service. It was no greater deed to serve my community through law enforcement.
That's definitely very admirable, Chief Adams. And it's very common that I'm realizing some of the best officers that I've come across at the different levels, whether it was chiefs or even sheriffs, like a lot of them just had that calling. They just knew that they wanted to go ahead and commit to their community in service. And I think that passion is really what separates some really, really good persons in the force. So I'm glad that you share in this passion and that commitment to your community. Would you be able to describe your unique experience as an African American serving the law enforcement industry? Like when you first started in that early part of your career compared to now, what did that look like? Go into detail on that one.
Great question. So, I think starting now, you pendulum shift in our profession from, this reform era, or actually when I was getting on in the late 90s, it was professional era to the reform era to now the community policing era. And so it's been interesting to see that pendulum switch between those three dynamics. I joined a force that was not very diverse. Actually, we were about 15%, 12% back then, and we're still about 12 or 15% diverse. But I've seen a more intentional focus from law enforcement leaders to be more diverse. They understand that diversity, not necessarily just in color, but also in race, in thought processes. When we have that kind of dialogue at the table, we are much better as law enforcement leaders. We're much better as a profession. One of the things that is very unique to law enforcement, we should be very representative of the community we serve, because again, we are about service to the community. And so the only way you're going to be about service is to have people of different backgrounds, different perspectives sitting at the table. I think as I look back on my career today, as I look back on my career today, I think the most pleasing part of the profession is that now we are starting to make significant inroads in terms of diversity, not just in color, and race. I've seen more African American and Latino police chiefs and sheriffs ascend to the highest positions of their organizations, which to me makes all of those organizations better. It makes our community better because now you have people that you can see at the top that you can aspire to be like. You can see a pathway to being a chief of police when you have a female or an African American or someone someone that's gay, right? I mean, when you have those different dialects at the top, you can see yourself ascending, and it motivates other officers to want to ascend to the top. So, I think we still have a lot of work to do. There's no doubt about that in terms of our profession. We still have to continue. Now we think about diversity, and a lot of folks that I've talked to say, yeah, I don't think I want to be the police right now. You guys are getting shot. You guys are hated. So we have to really think about, what is the most appropriate way? What is the most, as the private sector says, what is our most return on investment in terms of diversity? How can we get more African American and females and Latinos through the door? And then part of that question is, how can we get more African Americans, females, and Latinos in positions like mine?
Definitely. Based on what you're saying, it's so true. Being a part of a diverse force, it really allows you to have different perspectives and different experiences come into decision making. It also inspires the next generation to be able to look and see a force that reflects them. So I think this is definitely very important, and I'm glad that there have been strides that have been made. But this moves on to my next point. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'd love for you to kind of dig a little deeper in terms of what strides or what improvements are still needed to progress. I know you acknowledged the strides that were made, but also what you think needs to be done to progress even further?
Well, I think we have to continue. I mean, law enforcement agencies have to really take an intro look at themselves and say, are our hair standards, for example, do we have these stricken standards from the professional era, right? Where police departments were trying to become more professional and kind of rid themselves of the political era, but do those standards sometimes deter people from wanting to be the police, from tattoos to mustaches to beards to different hair gear, the headgear that individuals may wear because of their religion, or, African-American men or women may wear the locks, right? We have to continue to look inward about, are there things that we are have superficially, right? Have nothing to do with policing, so to speak. Are those opportunities to readjust? Certainly there are arguments on both sides, why you wouldn't want someone to have locks, right? And the easy argument is, well, you might be fighting with somebody and they pull your hair, right? Legitimate. But how often does that happen? This goes back to a principle that I truly believe in. It's evidence-based, it's research. We can't just throw out what may occur, because it may occur. But if the percentage is very low, then again, we go back to that return on it. Yeah, that may happen, and we need to train to that. The benefit to that is we make African-American females who feel more comfortable applying. And the reason it's so important that we diversify our ranks is because oftentimes when African-Americans, Latinos, or other races come on the department, they're the minority. And so they feel an effort to assimilate. They feel an effort to not be themselves, so to speak. So the more diverse agencies are, the more the environment is accepting of them. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. The reality is, when I walk into, 25 years ago, when I walked into a role, the reality is I was surrounded by predominantly the majority, all white men, right? And so, you don't feel comfortable being yourself or saying how you feel about things because you're surrounded by all white men. So agencies have to continue to be, purpose-minded in that environments where minorities are not the majority. How can we make the environment more inclusive? I often use this analogy, and it wasn't, I didn't coin it, but it really is true. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being able to dance, right? Being asked to dance. And that's so true, right? I mean, it's not just good enough to say, well, yeah, I mean, we have, diversity in our agency. Do you include that diversity within your decision making? And that's the important aspect to not only diversity, but it has to also include inclusion.
I am definitely with you in sharing that point of view, Chief Adams. And that is kind of part of what Crystal and James were really pushing to really explore the Black in Blue discussion, because we are giving a spotlight to these experiences to let persons like yourself know that these are issues that we are aware that the society is going through, and we need to be able to hear these experiences to be able to understand it and be able to be mindful of it in terms of progression in society with policy making or even higher level activities, really. I do appreciate you kind of exploring that and being cognizant of that within your department. So,
one thing I'll add, I think is important, oftentimes when we talk about legitimacy, we think of it from an outside perspective. But I challenge agencies to have legitimacy within the agency as well. Right? It's good enough to say we want legitimacy with the community. We certainly do. And I think agencies work very hard at that. But I think where we lose a little bit as a profession is we sometimes forget legitimacy also is inclusive of our workforce. And so we have to find ways to to have legitimacy in the agency. And the only way that's going to happen is if we get out of our comfort zone, so to speak. That we partner with an African-American officer to hear their experiences. Do we partner with the Latino officer to hear their experiences? I think we have to find ways to build legitimacy not only externally, but internally as well.
When I had recently gotten in touch with a couple sheriffs during the National Sheriffs Association conference, myself and Kristen, as well as Jason, who are members from Utility, we actually went to represent our company at the National Sheriffs Association conference in Washington, D.C. We came across a lot of sheriffs, and they definitely shared their perspective on the hiring process, which is something a lot of people realize is actually having quite an effect recently. I wanted to address this as well, and I wanted to ask you, with the wave of Black law enforcement officers reaching a certain retirement age, in addition to political tensions that have affected the community's relationship with law enforcement, how has your recruitment efforts in your department been affected, and what are you actively doing to combat that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one of the things we've recognized with these generations is that, when I came on the agency, I was just happy to have a job and locked into that job for a foreseeable future. I think with the generation, it's about relationships. And our recruiters have done a really good job of evolving from just saying, hey, join the police department, to more of let's build a relationship. Particularly for people of color, Black and brown, right? No doubt, white males are going to always apply for law enforcement, whether sheriff or city police. So there's not a whole lot of recruitment that needs to go around that. Where we is females and Black and brown. And so done specifically with those is target like athletes, for example, athletes that aren't going to pros, obviously military, but more importantly, the high schools, right? In trying to partner with them. And the idea of partnering with the high school, for example, is about building relationships so that they know when they either go to college or they turn one, that this is an opportunity for them to consider. And so I know our recruiters go to coffee. We have a PAR program, which is essentially is our physical agility program that they can come out and they can bond with other individuals that may be trying to get through the process. So we do runs, we do push-ups, we do sit-ups, and we do that every Thursday. Not so to get them physically ready. I mean, obviously that's the main point, right? To get them physically ready for our physical agility process. But more importantly, it's about bonding with mothers. I know just today I was leaving a swearing-in ceremony for several of our new officers, and 10 of those officers came from our PAR program, where they developed relationships. They understood that as a single mother, we will be here to support you, and here are the resources to support you. So we've really worked really hard at evolving our recruiting process. Obviously, we still go to colleges, we still recruit regionally, but really, I think the pivot for us is about meaningful relationships, particularly with people of color.
I really appreciate that you guys are really stepping up to the plate, kind of acknowledging the issues that are going on in recruitment and kind of figuring out ways that you can combat that. Different ways, really, not being focused on like the traditional ways of hiring, but kind of going above and beyond to make connections with people and allowing them to see the opportunity that they'd have in joining the force. I really think that's refreshing, especially now with the hiring issues that people are having worldwide, really. In terms of issues that people are having worldwide, there are some recent events that I'd love your opinion on in terms of how we are acknowledging it and moving past it in the police force. So the recent incidents of the George Floyd event in 2020 and the storming of the Capitol in 2021, those events in time definitely had an impact on the community and the police force and their relationship with one another. How has your department and within yourself as the chief, how have you been able to kind of manage your role and your alliance during times of conflict such as these?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I mean, I think we've all been challenged as a profession, individually, as some of the events that we've seen transpire across the country. One thing that, I think that I remind our community here is that there is no national police, right? I mean, what you see happen in another state or city may not be applicable to here. I think what we have to do as a profession, as an agency, we have to look at those events and see how we can get better. So, for example, when Sandra Bland and the no-knock warrants issue came up, we banned those for our agency in 2020. So our agency no longer serves no-knock search warrants. Now, obviously, we did that not necessarily in response to Sandra Bland, because our SWAT team had approached the executive staff and said that, hey, we don't think this is a good practice, not only for us who trains frequently, but a good practice for our proactive units. And we need to ban this so that it doesn't occur here. So Chief Taylor moved very quickly on that, and in 2020 we banned it. I think it was actually July 2020. So my point is, we have to be mindful of those events that occur across our country, and we have to learn from them. One of the things that we constantly tell our 1,700 plus police officers here in the city is that you have to be mindful of what you do on social media. You have to be, you unfortunately, as a public servant, you no longer are anonymous, right? Even when you have your Facebook locked down to, just your friends. Unfortunately, you lose a little bit of yourself, and you have to be mindful that you are reflective of a bigger cause, right? And so we constantly remind our police officers of that. Obviously, tactically, we learn things. We learn things from the January 6th event about preparation and making sure that we have the appropriate resources in place for what we believe will be a small event, right? But still have situational awareness to spin up resources. So we try every event that happens across the country to see how can we learn what, not to play armchair quarterback or criticize another agency, but we any profession learns from the mistakes or the challenges past. And so we as an agency are doing that. We've used body cams to do that, not only increase transparency and increase confidence in the police department, but we used it as a training tool. We've used it to make sure our officers, because ultimately we want to preserve the life of another person or ourselves. And if we have a responsibility, if we see something in those videos that's concerning, to address it and make our agency better, make our community better. So the short of it is, I think we use all of these incidences to learn, to get better. We don't criticize. Certainly law enforcement is a very unique job. I often have these conversations with folks in the community that, officers are having to process a lot of information and quickly make decisions. And we're human, and sometimes that can be the wrong decision. And certainly there are paths to correct that. But I think as a profession, we have to choose the path that we want to get better and use these as learning opportunities.
I definitely appreciate that. Moving forward, already you kind of have your department in a frame of mind where an event happens, that they're able to kind of update their policy or way that they're doing things, and just a practice of being mindful of events that are happening in terms of your policing efforts. I think that is definitely admirable. that your department is in that frame of mind to kind of think these things through, because it really does reflect on your police force. It reflects on how the community looks at their own police force, and it affects their relations, and all of that just ties in together. Let's see. So we did touch on diversity in the law enforcement industry, but I was looking into a lot of articles that really touched on the importance of it being linked to lessen policing disparities. And by that, I mean, there are a lot of articles out there that speak about the difference in how colored police officers compared to non-colored police officers might approach certain situations, and how the outcome may be more violent or less violent depending on those factors. With that being said, how important is it to have a diverse police force in your opinion?
Yeah, we kind of touched on that earlier, but I think, the reality is not only by color, but by gender. I think, having a diverse police department helps with all of that, right? It helps with uses of force. It helps with legitimacy. It helps with the community who can now see someone of authority who looks like them and maybe has a different reaction. I think oftentimes what you get with diversity is you get empathy, because people see themselves, police officers who are Black and brown and or female, can see themselves in, a single mother who's driving on a suspended license, right? She's just trying to get to work, right? I mean, it's unfortunate that her license is suspended, but she needs to get to work to feed her children. And I think a female officer can see it from that lens and provide empathy that provides a pathway for that person to get out of that cycle, right? Because, sometimes as the majority, we just see it as, hey, you broke the law, unfortunately, you got to get another ticket. But what they don't see on the back end of that is the repercussions of that, right? Some license was already messed up. Now we've made it more messed up by writing her another ticket for, a light out or, driving on a suspended license. So now she has double the fees. So the reality is that person's never going to get out of it. It's just going to keep compounding. So I think sometimes when you have a female officer or Black and brown officer, they can see it from that perspective and choose alternative. I also think having a more diverse agency, I'll say forces, is certainly drive an agency to think outside the box, right? Not that everybody needs a ticket, not that everybody needs to go to jail, right? And when you have a more diverse agency, then those conversations are more likely to occur, and the acceptance of that alternative outcome will be more accepted. I think all of those things play into, and again, when you have more chiefs that are female or Black and brown, then this ideology of alternative outcomes for people, both Black and white, to take a priority. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense for me. I do appreciate that. Well, based on what you said earlier, that there is hope and there are strides that are being made in terms of diversity. Before, it probably wasn't as diverse in terms of persons on the force, whether they were colored or they were female or they had a specific sexual preference, but now the doors are slowly opening. More conversations are being had. Policies changing to reflect that, and so it's definitely heading in a good direction. I would definitely say it's hopeful. So with the current events, a lot of news outlets, as well as a lot of members of community, have been speaking about policy changes that may need to be looked into in regards to the police or the law enforcement industry. A lot of persons' views are that the police industry or police departments should be defunded, or some of that funding should be allocated in a different way to different causes. What is your view on that?
Well, I mean, the reality is, I think police departments are always open to alternative responses, right? We understand, part of why we're in the paradigm shift we are today is because, governments have cut back. And so law enforcement is really the only tool that we have. When you think about mental health, for example, think about the decreased funding that has occurred. I don't care what state you go to, it's in every state, how they've closed down, institutions that serve those suffering from mental health. Now, some of that was for good because some of those institutions were doing some very bad things to people. But what they ended up doing was they didn't put anything in place to address those issues. So what happens is the largest form of government, of most government, is police. And so they're left to now deal with the decisions that were made years ago to not put appropriate funding in mental health space, for example. Or we look at defunding, so I am a proponent of looking at ways to reprioritize police response. However, I'm not a proponent of defunding police because I don't think that, the reality is you need police. I mean, there are some very bad people that are in our communities that only the police are equipped to deal. Now, I am all for, reimagining police and reimagining police response, right? Is locking everyone up for, small amounts of marijuana the right answer? I think most would tell you, no, it's not, right? But we do need to be more focused on violent offenders, those that are caught up in the cycle of violence. And obviously, small amounts of narcotics can lead to that. But if there's no evidence that small amounts of narcotics lead to violence, then do we need to look at reprioritizing police resources? Because the reality is, you can go across the country, every police department's short, right? So we have limited resources. So we need to be strategic in where we put our resources and need to be focused on violence that permeates our community. And I think as I look back over my career, I can look at, how we in communities across the country, there's not enough funding for education. There's not enough funding for healthcare. There's not enough funding for mental health. And so all of that then typically falls back on law enforcement to have to be the first responders, firefighters to be the first responders to deal with those issues because we are the typically largest form of government.
Definitely. I agree with you on that one, with really not necessarily removing the police force, because this is very important in terms of aiding the citizens, in terms of ensuring their safety is secure, but probably reimagining how the funding might be allotted or what is given more focus on where we may draw back. But it should never probably be a conversation of, do we need first responders? Syria. So I definitely see where you're going with that one. Definitely important for us to kind of really sit back, probably not a hard and fast rule about things, but definitely policy changes could be made to consider these kind of aspects in moving forward. So we've talked a lot about transparency and the safety of both the community and of officers. What actions do you think need to be taken in general, really, to improve trust between the community and law enforcement agencies?
Well, that's a good question. I think one, continuation of that community police relationship is, we have to, I think, provide more opportunities for more people from the community to be at the table. Too often police departments are dictating out to communities, this is how we're going to police, and with little input from communities. So I think we have to continue to seek those individuals in our community that normally wouldn't be at the seat and bring them to the table. I think too, we have to continue to look at the data, and we have to continue to provide that data to our community in a way that they can see for themselves, what are the outcomes of police, interactions, not just from traffic stops, but from, pedestrian stops, from, crime rate. We have to be able to continue to publish that kind of data because that builds legitimacy and trust as well. And then thirdly, I think police leaders have to continue to use technology to enhance that relationship with the community. More and more people, particularly coming out of the COVID pandemic, were more technology, more savvy with technology, more, you just think about how this particular is being conducted via Zoom, right? 5 years ago, we've been flying from here to here to have these meetings in person, but now there's this new platform for our communities to engage and for business to be conducted. Major multi-billion-dollar businesses are conducting board meetings via Zoom. So if multi-billion-dollar companies can do it, can we use technology to engage the community more, to make them feel more a part of the police department? And that's more important now, because often those groups that won't come to city headquarters to meet with the police can now do it in the comfort of their own home, in their own environment, and really provide the police department some key outcomes for them to consider. So, those are three things I think easily can be done in this era to continue to increase police legitimacy and increase trust with the community. Obviously within that technology, the continued expansion of body-worn cameras, public safety cameras, all of shots, or not thinking of it, the sound detection systems that are being deployed, LPRs, facial recognition. I was just looking at some technology the other day that allows a software to focus in on a gun, and tell the police department gun. Analytics. So these are all things within that technology space that I think could be stood up and discussed with communities in a way that it enhances trust and transparency, which builds trust with the police department.
Michael Woolley.
So sorry.
Chief, I know we're a bit over time. Are you still good to do about 2 more questions?
Yes, I think, yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, just responding to a message. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. You really touched on the importance of really embracing technology moving forward to maintain transparency and accountability with your community. And you definitely are well entrenched in the body-worn camera industry in terms of the technology that utility has to advance those efforts. With that in mind, I'd love to get your opinion on this statement. Body cameras are shedding light on issues compared to before. What are your views on that in general?
Yeah, I think, yes. The answer to that is yes. I think it's given our community a sense of the reality that police officers face, right? I think it's opened a door that didn't exist before. It's always been there, but I think body cams has brought it to the forefront in a way that it's digestible community. Now, obviously, there's a lot of context that's missing. And so I think police departments have to really work kind of like we have here. Every officer involved shooting, we have a community group that comes together and they view video, body cams, surveillance videos, and we talk about it because we produce from our body cams, we produce, or in car cameras, we produce a unedited version of the events that led up to that officer involved shooting. And so times we spend right before we release that publicly to the media and to the rest of the public, we spend time with community members, about 25 of them, on a call, on a Zoom call, again, using technology, because we understand people are busy. But using that technology, we provide them a draft copy of that video to answer any questions they may have. And it's not uncommon that they ask, hey, why did the police officer do this? Or could you edit the video so that it, reflects a little bit more of this? So it's a give and take. And we, when I say we're not the producers of the video. We actually send the video to California. It's a transparency coordinator who takes care of putting the video together along with the 911 call and the body cam and any other surveillance video we have. But my point is, we take that conversation that we use with the community to really push out what the product would be. And I know in the 7 or 8, we've had a couple videos that we sent back to California and said, hey, after talking with the community, can you adjust the video to show this? Again, it's not a representation of, was the police officer right? Was the suspect wrong? It really is just, this is what occurred. And this is what the officers had to deal with when they decided to take police action. So, and we do that in a timely manner. We try to get those videos done within a week to 2 weeks of the incident so that there's no delay in getting that information out. So again, having that technology readily accessible, having that technology, with the availability to get it to California, all of that has played well into our ability to build trust with our community and provide understanding for what police officers are having to deal with in these very stressful moments.
I'm glad that the technology is able to make things less of a guessing game and allow officers to kind of focus on their main duty, which is to protect and to serve your community and also to keep yourselves safe. The technology that you speak about definitely kind of allows officers to focus on that while also keeping accountability between themselves and the citizens they serve. So I'm glad that right now the law enforcement industry is really embracing technology as a friend with their efforts. And I hope that this continues to improve over time. It sounds like it definitely will if members of your department are influencing others, for sure. The last question I had for you, really, which ties everything together, is what role does the effective use of body cameras and in-car systems play in carrying out your role and improving community relations? I know that this is specifically catered to you because this is your focus within your department, or one of the roles that you play within your department. So definitely shed some light on that from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of talked on bits and pieces of it, but I mean, just highlighting kind of these things that we talked about it. I think it increases better transparency, stability, quicker resolution. One thing I think sometimes gets lost in this is corroborating evidence, right? So, and I didn't touch on this, but how many statements have we got for our homicide detectives on body cams, right? And see that in real time as opposed to trying to transpose that from somebody's notes. And then I did touch on this. Lastly, I think it really provides training opportunities for our officers. So really, when you look at those 5 areas, I think technology, body cams have really helped us in those areas specifically for our agency. And, you know, I'm not sure we would be as far as we are with our community had we not had a recognition of the technology, but what the technology could do for us as a policing agency.
Well, I think you covered some really important topics today, Chief Adams. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about these issues, and more than information for myself to absorb, this is also going to be critical for persons who are in your space, who are navigating these challenges to better overcome it. Not enough light is shed on these issues from a diverse perspective. So I appreciate you taking the time to kind of dive deep into some of these issues that are being faced within the law enforcement industry. Thank you so much for your time, Chief Adams.
Well, thank you guys for this endeavor. I think it's an important perspective that needs to be amplified across the country. And I just hope that my colleagues across the country look at diversity, look at transparency as wins, as opposed to just something they have to deal with.